On March the 13th, 2025, there was a total lunar eclipse that was visible from my location in Ontario, Canada. And so I went out to do my best to try and observe it and capture it in some degree. I took two of my smart scopes because, I thought I'd better cover myself in different ways. I took these two, the Celestron Origin and the Seestar S50, not to scale here, of course. The Celestron's much bigger than the Seestar. The Seestar has a 50mm aperture. The Celestron, which is about 2 inches, the Celestron has a 6-inch aperture. So, the Seestar kind of let me down a bit part way, although it did get some results. So first, I'm going to just review a bunch of images that I took with these two scopes as the eclipse progressed over the course of the night from about 11:30 on the 13th through to almost 5 a.m. on the 14th. So here are the images. Now the ones with the larger frame are from the larger moon are from the Celestron Origin. The others are labelled from the Seestar, and they are actually they're the ones that it creates. I was using the Celestron Origin in snapshot mode, which is basically what you have to do to photograph the moon. The Seestar, on the other hand, has a lunar mode, and it was actually setting the exposure automatically. With the Origin, I had to manually set the exposure, and it varied a great deal because the moon got much darker as it was eclipsed. For these initial shots where the moon's almost totally bright, I was using a 1 millisecond exposure, but then I gradually increased the exposure till up to about a full second for the exposures near totality. The Celestron doesn't have any facility to take videos. I did take some videos with the Seestar, and I'll show the results of those at the end of this video. Just a few little 10-second videos I took with the Seestar. The biggest problem I had was that the Seestar lost track of the moon around totality. They were both tracking the moon fine until around totality. They both started to drift a little bit, but the Origin never lost track of the moon. The whole disk of the moon was in the frame of the Origin for the whole time of the eclipse, which was about 6 hours from about 11:30 on the 13th to getting on for 5 a.m. on the 14th. But around totality, the moon just drifted out of the frame altogether on the Seestar, and then when I asked the Seestar to locate the moon, the Seestar couldn't locate the moon. I struggled with that a bit and then just gave up and used the Origin for the rest of the exposures, the rest of the eclipse, because what can you do? So we're getting fairly close to totality now with these images. Now I'm afraid these images weren't taken at absolutely regular intervals. It would have been much better if I could have done, but it was all a bit confusing trying to work with the two scopes, so I did my best, but they're not at absolutely even intervals. There are about 10-minute intervals between these images. So we're getting very close to totality now, and the Seestar will really start to drift when we get close to totality. Even the Origin's drifting a bit, and I'll start increasing the exposure soon so we can see the shadowed side, and so will the Seestar automatically. Because we can't really see the shadowed side at the moment, but it will come up shortly. I increased the exposure myself to about a second for the Origin, and the Seestar did its own adjustments, I believe. I'm quite a bit surprised there are so many of these where you can't really see the dark part, but you will see the dark part very shortly. This was around 2 a.m. Now you can see the Seestar starting to bring out the dark part, but it's also starting to lose its ability to track the moon. It's jumping around a bit. And it was around here very shortly, just around totality, that the Seestar completely lost track of the moon. It drifted out of the frame, and I couldn't get it back. So the rest of the eclipse I was just working with the Origin in snapshot mode to take images, and I think that's it. We're not going to get any more Seestar now, because this was from the point after the totality when I'd the Seestar had lost track of the moon. I assume the Seestar uses the disk of the moon and it just can't detect it well enough when it's eclipsed. Because these images are taken with like a full second exposure, you can actually see a couple of stars in them. If you look off to the right of the image, that's a star, but there's 2 stars, I think, there. This is because this is a 1 second exposure to bring out the eclipsed side of the moon. And then I just manually had to try and adjust the exposure as best as I could. Of course, it's when the moon's half eclipsed, there's no way you can set the exposure to bring out both the light side and the dark side. There's too much difference in illumination. The side illuminated by the sun is super bright and the other side is pretty dark, and no exposure is going to bring them both out. You'd have to take 2 different exposures and then you wouldn't get it precise. So anyway, we do what we can. As I say, we're still looking at about a 1 second exposure at this point because we're still pretty close to totality. Actually, I probably took rather more images around totality, so these are not spaced 10 minutes apart. These are closer together, the ones around totality. And then as we move out of totality, they space out a bit again to more like 10 seconds apart. But I maybe overdid it a bit shooting images around totality. There's quite a few of them here around totality. But we'll see the light start to creep across the disk of the moon again now. Now, the moon, of course, as it goes through these images, seems to be rotating. That is just the field rotation because the origin's on an altazimuth mount. So as it tracks the moon across the sky, the moon is always going to rotate in the origin's field of view. And we've got the light of the sun starting to come across, and have I started to clamp down to the exposure? I certainly will very soon. And of course the bright part just shows as a whited out crescent because it's no brighter than a normal moon would be. But if I exposed for that, then the dark side would just be totally dark. You wouldn't see anything. So I'm just trying to compromise here. To create an exposure that will show the most interesting way. So the dark side's getting darker and the light side's getting bigger, and eventually the dark side will pretty much disappear, and there's not much we can do about that if we want to bring out the light side. So we're certainly getting towards the end of the eclipse now, with the bright sunlight creeping across the moon here, and you're almost losing sight of the dark side, and eventually I will have to give up and change over the exposure to show the light side because you're not seeing either there. Now I've changed the exposure so you can actually see the light side, because I got to a point there where you couldn't see either the light or the dark. And I took the exposure down a bit again there, I guess, because it was getting over bright. So, and eventually we get down, as I say, I think we're maybe at about, I don't know what the exposure here is, but I think we're probably at about 4 or 5 milliseconds here, something like that, and it goes all the way down to 1 millisecond for the fully illuminated disk. Yeah, see, that's overexposed, so I took the exposure down a bit. There we go, and we're getting very close to a fully illuminated disk now at the end of the eclipse, which it's a slow process. It doesn't pass over quickly. As I say, the shadows started to cover part of the moon about just before midnight, and the moon wasn't fully revealed again without a shadow till close to 5 a.m. But we're getting very close to that now, so there you go. This is more or less the end of the eclipse. A little bit of cloud coming in then as well. I could see that last image was blurred by cloud. But we were fortunate enough that there was very little cloud that night, so most of the time we could see the moon. There were only a couple of times where it was a little bit obscured by some cloud. Okay, so then what I did, and we're getting to that about now, is I edited together some of these images, not all of them, but some of the images, and I overlaid them to try and get the disk of the moon as far as possible in the same position so you could see the eclipse progressing in a more sort of animated fashion. So these are all images from the origin, and I've just kind of basically adjusted them so that the disk of the moon is as closely as possible aligned from one to the other. Now, of course, it still rotates because that's the field rotation you're getting from the, photographing with an altazimuth mount over the course of several hours. You're always going to get a lot of field rotation in several hours with an altazimuth mount. But anyway, so there you go. There's this sort of animated version of the eclipse, and we've passed totality now, and it's coming out. And yeah, there's where I switched the exposure over again, and that's a pretty good representation of the eclipse, although of course massively, it's like 5 hours condensed into about 1 minute. And finally, this is some video from the Seestar. This is a sequence, I don't know whether this is even worth including really, but this is a sequence of 10-second videos from the Seestar. They're quite nice and clear, but and this is, well, there's hardly any shadow there. This is just as the eclipse is starting and the shadow is beginning to cover the moon. Well, some way from covering it, but it's starting to move across the moon. Yeah, see, now you can definitely see the shadows starting from the bottom left, really. For whatever reason, well, I guess because of where we're located in the eclipse's path and as it moves across the sky, the shadow kind of starts in from the bottom left, but then it kind of goes away to the bottom right, as you'll see when well, you won't see so much in this because this doesn't go past totality. Because the Seestar didn't go past totality. The Seestar lost track of the moon around totality. So this is composed from a bunch of 10-second videos I shot with the Seestar up until the time of totality, at which point the Seestar lost track of the moon, so then there wasn't any more Seestar capturing. So there we go. So now we've got, well, we're not quite, yeah, we're almost half shadowed now. So that, I don't know what that would be, about 1 a.m. But see, it's already starting to drift a bit. The moon is as it gets eclipsed, as there's not so much of the disk visible, it starts to drift in the frame of the Seestar. It drifted a little bit even in the frame of the origin, but the origin never lost any of it always had the full disk of the moon in the frame, whereas the Seestar, as you'll see, doesn't eventually. It kind of starts to really drift, and eventually it just drifted right out of frame. And then I asked the Seestar to find the moon, and the Seestar jumped around the sky trying to find the moon and failed to find the moon, because I guess it just couldn't see the eclipse disk. It was too dim. I wonder if they've updated the firmware at all to make it any better at tracking a dimmed moon disk. We'll find out if we have another eclipse, but I don't know when that's going to be. So we're getting pretty close to totality here with these 10-second Seestar images. And we're also getting quite a bit of drift. Eventually, now this, as I say, this was the Seestar itself, not me, but the Seestar will adjust the exposure on the moon so you can see some of the eclipsed side, but then it has trouble tracking it. Oh, we're not quite there yet. No, not even there. We're still only showing a sliver of the moon. We can't really see the eclipse portion at all. But we will. There we go. So now the eclipse portion's coming out, but not very well because the Seestar's having severe trouble. This is unedited video from the Seestar, so this is just the Seestar struggling to track the moon and essentially failing. And it totally failed a few seconds later, and the moon just went out of field, and I couldn't get it back again. But anyway, there you go. So we got a reasonable amount of results. That was the lunar eclipse of March 13th for me. Next up will be a video of some more deep sky objects.